Very good morning, sir. Professor Frank Furedi, author and sociologist. Frank, how are you doing?
Not bad, yourself?
Very well indeed, very well indeed. Now, I know being a Tottenham fan, you probably don't want to talk that much about football because, you know, at least you're not a Chelsea fan. It could be worse, right? But I don't know if you've seen the front page of The Sun this morning, but, you know, the ship hits the fan is quite a good headline. Unbelievable stuff, this. You know, you've now got some bloke writing in The Guardian because he's seen something that he doesn't understand and has decided it must have a link to slavery. I mean, this is now peak wokery, isn't it?
Well, you know, some people might have a light-hearted response and say this is just a joke. These are just a bunch of fools who are trying to find something to complain about. But actually, this is part of a very determined and very insidious project of essentially calling into question the legitimacy of symbols and statues and the rituals that are part and parcel of people's heritage. And basically, if they remove those ships from the Manchester City and Manchester United shirts, what they really have said is that the history of Manchester is a history of shame, and that people that live in that city should be ashamed of where they come from, that Manchester is entirely built on slavery.
Yeah.
The history has got no redeeming features. And in a sense, what it does is it kind of renders toxic, totally toxic, the past, and basically suggests that people in Manchester should literally detach themselves from it and give in to these campaigners, these crusaders, who are trying to guilt trip people.
It really is extraordinary, isn't it? Because there is now this, I mean, the idea that the royal family are looking into it, the fact that, you know, in some parts of America, the reparations business is a big business. We had that woman, Trevelyan, didn't we, going over to the Caribbean and handing out her family's money because she was ashamed of what they'd done. I mean, it's such a kind of a middle-class, sort of academia-driven load of old nonsense. But it is, as you say, insidious.
It is, because if they are going to win and prevail, then basically what they will tell people is that where you come from is just inherently contaminated by all these bad things that your ancestors did. And the trouble is that, and the way that history is being rewritten, you can literally say anything and get away with it. So we have a situation where you see a ship. Now, most normal human beings, when they see a ship, they think of the ocean, they think of traveling.
Yeah.
Slavery does not come to mind. And to make that connection, coupling those ships on the emblems with slavery, normally would require a fantastic leap in imagination. But today, people can make these grotesque claims and get away with it because there's already a fertile terrain for feeling insecure and defensive about Britain's past.
Yeah, and the ship, as you've quite rightly said, is synonymous with Manchester, and Manchester's sort of city, the city of Manchester's own kind of crest has a ship in it because the Manchester Ship Canal, even though that's not the kind of ship that was on it, is synonymous with Manchester as well. You know, it's mad. And also, as you've just been pointed out to me, you know, there's a devil on the Manchester United crest as well, but they're okay with that.
Well, not for long, because it's possible. It's possible that the devil or the devil's wife had some shares in some plantation in another part of the world, and maybe the devil was directly involved or indirectly involved in slavery as well. So you can make up the most fantastic...
Yeah. But this is it, you know, Satanism's fine unless there was a connection to slavery, you know. Yeah. Then it's absolutely untenable, can't be done. But it is remarkable, isn't it? But still we go on. But we now live in this ludicrous world where everything that some people don't like is bad. So, for example, we've got the latest eco-nutters out there saying they might be going to demonstrate at the London Marathon or they might not. We've got the guy jumping on the snooker table who's decided on moral grounds not to have any children, which is quite good news for the rest of us, I suppose. But it's all about them telling us how we should be living and how evil we all are.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when people like you and me would have some bad habits or some good habits. We'd have some strong views about what is right and what is wrong in terms of our lives. But we didn't really need to go out and force other people to eat the way we do, to force other people to think the way we do, because we had this basic commonsensical approach of live and let live. Whereas now what happens is that unless you accept your somebody else's version of events and subscribe to their theory about the problems of the world, you're inherently evil, and therefore you're a legitimate target for protest and demonstration.
Yes. It really is extraordinary, isn't it? And I mean, as far as the London Marathon goes, you would think that would be something that actually they would not interfere with, because most of the people running in it are raising money for charity, which is good, generally speaking. And it's also environmentally damaging. But
I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. I mean, these runners are breathing very, very hard, and the harder your heart beats, and the more breath that passes through your body, the more carbon you emit, and that may well be a problem for our net zero sort of objectives.
It may well be. I've got a note here from Jake. He says Extinction Rebellion have confirmed that they are hiring around 200 diesel-powered coaches to bring in protesters from as far away as Glasgow to London and back to protest against people using diesel.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense when you think about it. From their perspective, their logic, well, why not?
But I was talking yesterday about having to find another way of sort of punishing them, because they clearly don't mind going to prison, some of them. The guy that was in Sheffield jumping on the snooker table has been in prison loads of times, doesn't care. They get crowd-funded. He actually gets paid for demonstrating. Other people are funded, like the Extinction Rebellion, by very wealthy individuals and corporations in some ways. You've also got Dale Vince, the electricity guy. He's funding Just Stop Oil. You know, they've got plenty of money. So, you know, kind of arresting them and locking them up clearly is not a big enough deterrent. We'd have to find another way, don't we?
I think we do. I think we have to call into question their bluffing, call into question their narrative, and basically demonstrate the fact that at the end of the day, they're just a bunch of intolerant, silly young kids who are basically haven't got a proper case. And it seems to me that, you know, we need to also react much more aggressively. So, you know, if you're going to stop people from playing pool or billiards, or you're going to stop people from running in a marathon, I do think the crowd has got to make their views sort of felt very, very clearly, that you're not really interfering with our life, and we're not letting you anywhere near where we are. And at some point, this is going to come to some, you know, real polarized sort of infighting between the two sides. And I just get embarrassed by the fact that people who are sensible are often too embarrassed to react and yell and shout, and make it very, very clear that you are not only just disrupting our life, you are trying to disorient us from getting on with the way that we live.
Yeah. And
that's not fair. That's really is very, very unfair.
Well, several people have suggested to me that if you just allowed the general public to deal with these idiots, they wouldn't be doing it more than once, because they would realise it was a bit of a mistake. And it almost went that way up in Liverpool with the Grand National. But let's talk a bit about the migrants, because the latest news this morning from the Home Office is that judges will now no longer have the power to block migrant flights. But I seem to remember the last time there was an attempt to fly to Rwanda, albeit with only one person on it. The initial judges actually didn't try and block the flight anyway.
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question, because there is a misuse of the law, the politicization of the courts, in order to thwart sort of governments and policymakers from dealing with the migration question. Because at the moment, anytime anybody wants to do anything effective or decisive, there's always this assumption that the court will intervene and prevent that from occurring. So this is a problem, but of course, I'm not really sure to what extent there is the will on the part of the government to actually take on the judiciary, and whether or not there's the will on the part of government to basically take on those sections of the media that are inciting opposition to their attempt to send people to Rwanda or to deal with the boats. Because at the end of the day, you do need to be fairly focused, fairly brave to deal with this question, because there's such pressure on you to give in, roll over, and pretend that the problem doesn't really exist.
Well, I mean, I did that for so many years, and they suddenly realised it didn't go away, so now they're having to confront it. And I think because it's such a big issue, that's why it's going to be so important, I think, that if Keir Starmer doesn't come out and have some kind of policy on it, I don't think he wins the next election.
I think it's becoming a huge issue, because people can see in front of their eyes that we now live in a world where Britain's borders don't really have very much of a real existence, that people can very casually just walk in and know that there's going to be no real comeback on that. And for a lot of people, this sends out a message that basically says that they are not really in control of their own lives, that the government is not in control of their security. And that is a massive, massive challenge, because unless the government takes the nation's security more seriously, people are going to look for other political parties.
Yeah. Well, they really are. Well, I must admit, I had a slightly wry smile on my face, albeit that the queue wasn't very bad and it moved quite quickly. But leaving France to get on the shuttle end of last weekend, the fact that they stamp your passport as you leave France, I was just thinking to myself, well, if they can do that here, why can't they set up a little passport booth on the beach before these characters get into the dinghy and at least ensure that they have a passport before they get on?
I think that's probably true. And I think the other day when all those poor people were queuing up to take the ferry from Dover, if they had been illegal immigrants going on a little boat, they probably would have gone on the other side a little bit faster.
They would have done.
And if they had waited their turn,
Yeah, absolutely incredible stuff. Frank, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Frank Furedi, professor, author and sociologist, of course, as well.